Welcome back to the twinspires Racing Roundtable. I'm Ashley Anderson here with James Scully and Vance Hansen. Had some thriller music-esque music in our waiting room if you're joining us. And we are going to be talking about the first stop on the road to the Kentucky Derby in Oaks today. Plus, we'll look at Woodbine's Breeders' Cup prep races and what else caught our eye from the weekend. And James, let's start with those Churchill Downs prep races, the Grade 3 Iroquois and the Grade 3 Pocahontas. Both winners earned 10 points along the road to the Derby and Oaks, respectively. And let's talk about your takeaways from either of those races.
Yes, I'll talk. I'll mention both races. I'll start, though, with Jonathan's Way. He was seized command at the break and recorded, I thought, a very impressive win in the Iroquois Stakes. Completing the 1 mile distance in nearly 2 seconds faster than the Pocahontas winner, LaCara. And what was really, eye-catching was the way that he just broke and showed this speed, Ashley and Vance, because in his career debut a month earlier at Saratoga, he got pinched. He broke a half step slowly and got pinched real hard at the break and had to rally from well off the pace to win going away by 4+ lengths. Today, on Saturday, he broke on top, like I said, assumed this short lead. And we'll see when Joel Rosario gets to the top of the stretch with Jonathan's Way, he just has another gear. And I thought that this smart turn of foot that we'll see from him really bodes well. This is his second career start. He still has to go 2 turns, but I think the mile and the 16th distance this fall will be well within his grasp. And like I said, it looked like right at here coming off the turn, Jonathan's Way was going to get a little bit of a challenge from Giacoso and maybe others, but Rosario had more in reserve and really like how he just put the race away right here just by opening up on the field. The trainer, Jonathan Bauer, talked about how his ears were pricked and, just really running smoothly on the stretch. And it was really a progression from his career debut. So I think this performance bodes well for him, at least this fall. His next start will be the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And he got a 93 Brisnet speed rating for the 2 3/4 length decision. And I think his tactical ability maybe an advantage at Del Mar this fall. I caught up with Joel Rosario after this race. We'll see some of his quotes regarding Jonathan's Way.
Well, congratulations. Last time broke poorly, rallied to win off the pace. Just tell us about your trip today and the start.
Yeah, very good trip. He broke better than the last time. And, I just kind of let it be what he wanted to be happy today. And, he showed, good, nice cruising speed. He kept going 24 horns. So, that was a very good performance from him.
Really nice turn of foot at the top of the stretch. They were sort of bunching up behind you, and then he had another gear left.
Yes, he did. It looked like he was there for me when I asked him, and then he just kept moving with that, that cruising speed 12-12 the whole time that he had. So, that was very impressive.
This is the first. This kicks off the road to Kentucky Derby Series. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to go a mile today. What do you think about him running longer distances in the future?
He seemed like, he got no problem with that. And but we'll see. We'll see.
All right.
When he runs next again.
Well, congratulations, Joel. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
James, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but Jonathan's Way, his sire is Vekoma, and had a pretty good week this week. Vance, what were your takeaways? Anything about LaCara? I'm not sure exactly how we're supposed to pronounce it. The track announcer said LaCara.
Nothing so much on LaCara, just because I thought, as James said, the Iroquois was a considerably faster race than the Pocahontas, and based on that, I expected it will prove to be a more meaningful one, both in the short term and probably in the long term as well. James alluded to Jonathan's Way's debut at Saratoga, where he flubbed the start, had a little trouble, overcame it, and I like the fact that this colt has a bit of versatility in him. He came from behind to win at Saratoga, and here he led all the way. in a very nice performance. The runner-up, Owen Almighty, I thought turned in a really nice race here. It was another solid effort on his part. He entered the Iroquois 2 for 2. This was his first loss, but this was also another promising effort for him after winning the Ellis Park Juvenile. So I think the top 2 finishers in the Iroquois are both horses that we can look forward to seeing much more of. Now, from a pedigree perspective, there's a chance both of these colts will excel more over a mile or around one turn rather than, say, 9 or 10 furlongs. But that remains to be seen. Both of them should get a mile and a 16th the distance of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. That distance should be within their wheelhouse, and they both deserve a shot to try it. And one last thing about Jonathan's Way, he is an Ohio bred, and we don't see too many Ohio breds at the very top level of racing. However, from an historic perspective, we've had 2 Ohio breds go off favored in the Kentucky Derby in my lifetime anyway. One was Air Forbes 1 back in 1982. The other more notable horse named Harlan's Holiday in 2003. Both of them were favored in the Derby, and neither of them won. But since there's been a 20-year gap between those two, and now more or less a 20-year gap here to Jonathan's Way, I guess it's time for the Buckeye State to have another major contender for the first Saturday in May.
Harlan's Holiday was notable too because I think he was like 6-1 favorite. I think he's one of the highest priced favorites in the Derby history.
I think you're right about that.
We all covered a lot with Jonathan's Way. As you mentioned, James, 93 Bristnet speed figure, improving on his 89. And as far as LaCara, this is a Mark Cassie trainee. Took 4 tries to break her maiden, but now has a 2-win streak. And then her Bristnet speed figure did go down, an 81 in the Pocahontas, had a 91 breaking her maiden, 2 back. With the Iroquois as well, I'll mention, not the best history when it comes to Kentucky Derby starters. We've had 29 race in the Iroquois and later appear in the Kentucky Derby, and none of them have won so far. We have 2 that finished in the money. So looking at Lee was second in the 2017 Kentucky Derby, and then At the Threshold finished third in the 1984 Derby. So not exactly the best prep race so far when it comes to finding Kentucky Derby winners.
It might get better though. You never know because they just started this point series in 2013, and excuse me, with it being part of the point series since then, its relevance is increased in a sense. And I'll mention LaCara. She did only get an 81 speed rating in that race compared to Jonathan's Way, who got a 93. I mentioned earlier he was nearly 2 seconds faster, but that was this filly is at least moving the right way for Mark Cassie. It took her 4 starts to break her maiden. She finally broke through with a convincing win at Saratoga. And I thought this proved to be a really exciting stretch duel between LaCara, the horse on the outside, number 14. You can see her up there in third right now. Liam in the Dust, who ran well for Rudolph Brissett in her second career start. She was coming off a debut maiden win at Saratoga. And then even the third place finisher, Akana Mama, who gets involved down on the inside, number 2. She was in the mix in the stretch. So the top 3 finishers ran well in this race. They're going to have to keep improving from, keep running faster to beat better rivals. But they're all just right now just finding their best form.
And pedigree-wise, we talked about Jonathan's Way's pedigree, but with LaCara, she's by Kentucky Derby winner Street Sense out of a Bernardini mare. So certainly can handle longer distances based on pedigree. We'll see what happens. Well, let's switch over to Canada. We had 3 Breeders' Cup win-in-year events, 2 for juveniles, and then we had the Woodbine Mile for the Breeders' Cup Mile. So Vance, what did you take away from any of those prep races?
Well, I'll start by saying that earlier this year, Godolphin and trainer Charlie Appleby looked absolutely loaded for the Breeders' Cup Mile with horses that were formerly based in Europe during the summer, but were based at Saratoga this year. But now that contingent looks increasingly depleted. Last year's mile winner, Master of the Seas, bruised a foot. in July, and he hasn't had a published work since late July. So I'm very concerned that his Breeders' Cup Mile title defense isn't going to happen. Godolphin also had Ottoman Fleet, who didn't perform up to snuff in the 4-star Dave. And then on Saturday, Naval Power was a heavy favorite in the Woodbine Mile, favored at 1-2, and he ran really subpar in that race, finishing off the board fourth. And, perhaps he can bounce back in his next start, whatever that's going to be, but this was not the deepest cast he was facing. And so his Breeders' Cup Mile chances of him performing well in the Breeders' Cup Mile, I think, took a really serious hit in this race. As I said, this wasn't the deepest cast in the world. Of course, he was favored at 1-2. The winner, Win for the Money, and the runner-up Philo de Ariana were both fairly well-exposed types. And third-place finisher Big Rock, this was his best performance of the year so far, but he simply hasn't been the same horse this year as he was last season in England and France when getting the softer ground that he prefers. So the Woodbine Mile to me wasn't a very strong prep for the Breeders' Cup equivalent this year. I'll briefly touch on the 2-year-old races. First off, trainer Mark Casse had a terrific day on Saturday. We mentioned him winning the Pocahontas. He won the Woodbine Mile there with Win for the Money. And then he ran 1-2-3 in the Natalma Stakes for 2-year-old fillies. But I think the Summer Stakes for the 2-year-old colts was probably the stronger of the 2-year-old races here. It was dominated by a couple of Europeans. New Century finally got the upper hand against Al Qudra. This was their third meeting of the year. Al Qudra had won the first two, but New Century, I think, performed very well here, looked stylishly pulled away at the end of this race, and he looks like a serious contender for the juvenile turf at Del Mar, a race that 11 Europeans have won 11 of the 17 renewals of the race, and New Century is by a 2,000 guineas winner named Kamiko, and so I think he will deserve a very long look at Del Mar, James.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and he finished up in like 132.80. I mean, that was a fast summer stakes. That was the only race of the 4 grade ones that was really even formful because New Century was the second choice in the wagering, and he beat the favorite Al Qudra by about a length, who was the favorite. Al Qudra had beaten him. Vance talked about how he had beaten him earlier, but those races were, I believe, were both at 6 furlongs. New Century had just recorded a stakes win when he stretched out to 7 furlongs. Stretch out to a mile. So I think it's encouraging that it's seemingly getting better as the distances get longer. And that was a really good race. As far as the other races were just like upset themed to me. If you had read the notes before the Woodbine Mile, you could see where Win for the Money was training forwardly according to his connections. But it was really difficult for me to envision him just not only winning, but winning in a convincing fashion. I mean, he ran right by Philo de Ariana entering deep stretch and won convincingly at 13-1. If that had been a lot of those fields were smaller fields, and I think the horses that won, if they'd been in 12-horse fields, would have even been longer odds. But like Philo de Ariana, that was my top pick in there. I was surprised he was 6-1, but he clearly, that pace took a toll on him. You can see he ran that second quarter mile and in a shade less than 22 and 2/5 seconds, and it just left him a little bit softened up for the latter part. But Vance referenced it. Naval Power just didn't fire at all in the stretch, and Big Rock I thought just closed belatedly for third. So Win for the Money was a surprise winner and really just a standout performer in what I don't think is a real stellar edition of the Woodbine Mile. As far as the Natalma went, Mark Casse was 1-2-3 in there. And one more time, he had been trying to run her on the turf at Saratoga. She it was coming off a nice win and an off the turf maiden, so she finally gets to the turf here and runs a really good race. Now, she did have a little bit of a jump on her stablemate. She was second. Vixen was about a length behind her in third, turning for home, and held on to win by a head. But Vixen was coming off a real nice debut win. I think she could have a nice future as well. So those fillies were all three, even Nitrogen, who set the pace at 41-1, could be headed to the juvenile fillies. We'll see what they decide to do. And then the one other grade one was the E.P. Taylor. I didn't understand letting Full Count Felicia. It looked like she might prefer a little bit less ground than 1.25 miles, but she was out there by like nearly 20 lengths off of a victory in the Grade 3 Canadian Stakes, and that was just too much of a head start. Moira cut the lead to about 3 lengths on the wire, but they just let that 5-year-old mare steal that race. And like I said, that race only had about 5 horses in it, and she went off 7-1. But if that had been a 10-horse field, Ashley or Vance, Full Count Felicity would have been easily double-digit odds. So upsets were the big theme. I still give those runners from the Natama and Summer a chance to make an impact in the Breeders' Cup juvenile turf events, but we'll see about the E.P. Taylor and Woodbine Mile.
Yeah, as you mentioned, upsets were the theme. Godolphin was favored in all 3 of those Breeders' Cup races and then failed to win. But, you did have Alcudra finish second to New Century in the summer. And I think we all agree that New Century probably has the best chance of the 3 preps to go on to win the Breeders' Cup. His winning time for a mile was just shy of what Win for the Money did at a mile, and that's, older horses. But I also wanted to point out that the Woodbine Mile normally actually does have a lot of crossover with the Breeders' Cup Mile. We have Court Vision, who won both races actually in different seasons. Then we had, Wise Dan won back-to-back in both the Woodbine Mile and the Breeders' Cup Mile. Mark Casse had Tepin in the Breeders' Cup.
Hall of Famers right there.
Yeah. And then Charlie Appleby, of course, won the last 2 editions with Modern Games and Master of the Seas at the Woodbine Mile and the Breeders' Cup Mile. But this year, I don't really feel like Win for the Money is probably up to par with the competition he's going to face over at Del Mar. But I could certainly see New Century, maybe even Alcudra bouncing back in, the Breeders' Cup juvenile turf. I had to think that one through. They get long when you have to add in the juveniles to the name. But Vance, I know there's a runner that you're looking at potentially for the Breeders' Cup Mile. We'll talk about that in the next segment. But first, James, what caught your eye from the weekend?
Well, I will mention Vacoma. He's currently leading all first crop sires with 19 winners. That's 4 more than second best, which is Complexity. And but one thing, Complexity had Moplex win the Grade 3 Sanford, and he had Black Forza win a Group 2 event race over in England. So he had already had a couple of graded/group winners. Vacoma had no even graded placed runners so far, but he broke through in a big way, I thought, on Saturday. Jonathan's Way is by Vacoma. First off, Vacoma's the son of Candy Rod, who's the sire of Gun Runner. That's going to provide some stamina on the top side of Jonathan's Way. Vance referenced that damn side's Indian Charlie, which could be a little bit of concern, but it's still a mix of speed and stamina. We'll see how that works out down the road. And then the other runner for Vacoma over the weekend was Vixen. She ran second in the Natama in her second career start and appears to have a future on the turf for Mark Casse. So I wanted to mention how Vacoma had a breakthrough with some quality runners. And also want to mention, we'll talk more about the races at Parks this weekend on Thursday on the jury. But I thought it was fascinating to see Torpedo Anna. She's coming back off of a 28-day rest after finishing a head second to the possible Breeders' Cup Classic favorite Fierceness in the 1.25 mile Travers. She's going to turn around 4 weeks later, running the Grade 1 Cotillion. When she ran in the Coaching Cup American Oaks 2 starts back, they could only get 3 rivals to run against her. Well, they got 7 on Saturday, and I think Power Squeeze is clearly the second best 3-year-old dirt route filly in America off of wins in Alabama and Delaware Oaks. She's in there to take on Torpedo Anna. And I like Sitamara too. I think to me, she could be in the top 3 by the end of the year. She's an up-and-coming daughter of Arrogate for Bill Mott coming back off of a freshening. So I'll mention seeing Power Squeeze and Sitamara in there I thought was really fascinating. And we'll see if that Travers takes anything out of Torpedo Anna, because she is facing a pretty solid field in the Cotillion.
Yeah, I think it's possibly a trap race for her, no doubt about it. She's basically clinched the 3-year-old filly championship, but $1 million on the line, Grade 1 black type. I guess I'm not surprised based on those factors that the Cotillion got 7 other fillies in the field. As far as what else caught my eye over the weekend, there were a handful of Breeders' Cup winning in preps held in Ireland. And I'll mention just 2 of the winners. I'll first mention Bradsell, who is now a dual qualifier for the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. He won the Nunthorpe at York last month, and on Sunday at the Curragh, he had another convincing win in the Flying 5 Stakes over 5 furlongs naturally. I don't necessarily think he'll be able to go toe-to-toe with Cogburn if Cogburn shows up with his A game at Del Mar, but Bradsell, I think, is good enough to give a strong account of himself. A reminder that only one European-based runner has ever captured the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, but the quality of the horses representing Europe in that race, I think, have improved dramatically in the last few years. And Bradsell will be joined by Big Ev's last year's juvenile turf sprint winner in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint in November. So it should be a pretty strong contingent to take on Cogburn. And basically, he's going to need a lot better competition than what he's been beating in the U.S. so far this year. The second horse I want to bring up is Porta Fortuna, who on Saturday won the Matron Stakes at Leopardstown. This was her 3rd consecutive Group 1 success after winning the Coronation at Royal Ascot and the Falmouth at Newmarket. I think this was a win and you're in for the filly and mare turf, but she's actually going to be pointed now for the Breeders' Cup Mile. And she did travel well to America last season. She ran in the juvenile fillies turf at Santa Anita and was only beaten a half length in a pretty good performance. Overall, though, I'm not keen on the possibility of a 3-year-old filly winning the mile in their first attempt facing older males. Now, Maj almost did it last year, but there's a reason the only 3-year-old fillies to win the mile in its entire history were standouts like Miesk, Ridgewood Pearl, Six Perfections, and Goldikova. All had previously won open Group 1 miles, specifically the Prix du Moulin at Longchamp, the Prix Jacques Lemerroy at Deauville. So Porta Fortuna, compared to those fillies of the past, has not been as battle tested this season, facing fillies and mares exclusively. And so if she takes any kind of action on Breeders' Cup Day, she'd be a fade for me at short odds.
You think?
I mean, I got burned by Six Perfections at Santa Anita. I don't know if her form was all. I don't know.
She's beaten older males in the Prix du Moulin, so.
Those fillies worry me, though, coming over from Europe for the Breeders' Cup Mile. I guess that's a fair point where it's the 3-year-old thing and not facing open company could be a liability. But I looked at that race, and I thought that was pretty strong performance. She looks pretty good to me, Vance.
Does she at least win for the money?
I think that's entirely possible, but this was not a strong renewal of the Matron Stakes, and the Fallen Angel, I think, was second in that race on Saturday, and she hadn't run at all since winning the Irish 1,000 guineas in May. So she's a filly that can step up. I think she's stepping up to the 1.25 mile Prix de l'Opera next time out, but Porta Fortuna was not getting a very strong test of class or form in this race.
And I'll mention a race at Churchill Downs that was potentially a prep for some of these horses for the Breeders' Cup Sprint. We had Skelly and Close the Game Sugar in a rematch in the Louisville Thoroughbred Society. Close the Game Sugar got the better of Skelly in the Aristides, but it was Happy as a Choice who came through and beat Skelly by a neck in this race. And James, you called it. You also, ahead of the race, were concerned that Close the Game Sugar, maybe, something was taken out from the Bing Crosby, where he was second to the Chosen Ron, who is probably going to be favored in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. But Skelly, this is the third straight time that Skelly has finished second, and it's outside of Oaklawn Park, where he has 8 of his career 10 victories. So I am concerned about Skelly over at Del Mar, but this was, I thought, a very good race that we saw from Skelly, breaking from the outside, got the early lead, and it almost looked like he was going to wire the field until Happy as a Choice got up there right in time to win by a neck. Close the Game Sugar ended up feeding to finish 7th, and a little concerning, but maybe we'll see a bounce back performance in the Breeders' Cup. What do you think, James? Do you think I know you like Close the Game Sugar.
But he loves Churchill Downs, and he got the right trip in there, being drawn outside. I thought it was an improved effort from Skelly from his 2 previous seconds. Steve Asmussen and freshened him from July for this race. And, he just got nailed on the wire, and they ran 108 and change. So that was a pretty strong effort, and he's going to bring speed to the Breeders' Cup Sprint. He might have more pressure up front, and it might be too much considering he has to ship to Del Mar. But this was a pretty good effort. And you referenced what my concern was with Close the Game Sugar. He had run 3 races from Derby week to the end of late June at Churchill Downs. All 3 of them were big efforts. Then he shipped out to Del Mar and ran a big effort to be second in the Bing Crosby. And all those races and travel just took something out of him because he was all rank and tossing his head early. So I don't know if he'll be able to bounce back per se in the coming months, but considering he just ran his first dirt race in May, and he's a gelding, he could still come on and be good this fall, or even if it's not good this fall, be good next year.
Yeah, Breeders' Cup Sprint feels very wide open right now. Not feeling super confident with the Chosen Ron, just, got beaten last start.
Yeah.
And
I don't see that like real classy standout performer. The Chosen Ron obviously has the resume per se, but to me, he's been, he's beat up on a lot of Calbrets and suspect rivals out west, and he's coming off a loss, and it's hard for these sprinters to hold their form for, 18 months straight or something. So, that race has a completely different vibe from, for example, the turf sprint, which has this dominant favorite.
All right, well, less than 2 months to the Breeders' Cup, so we'll find out who gets the better of everybody over at Del Mar. But that's all the time we have today for the Racing Roundtable. I will be out the next 2 weeks for the Roundtable, headed on some PTO. And James, you will be live at Churchill Downs on Saturday with more racing coverage. And
enjoy your time off, Ashley.
Thank you. We'll see you all next time.
When it comes to horse racing, you can never have too much information. With TwinSpires, you can place your bets with confidence. Whether you use handicapping insights like our Brisnet speed ratings, prime power and past performances, the guidance of our experts' top picks, or just choose a name that catches your eye. Yes! No matter how you pick your horse, bet with TwinSpires. And now you can race to victory with TwinSpires tournaments.